Meeting of the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. The first item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any public comments? Any public comments? Nobody has approached me or you? So any public comments? If not, the next item would be the approval of the April 12th, 2002 committee minutes. What are your wishes?
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
And moved by Gibbs, seconded by Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. And for the record, Supervisor Zhang is participating remotely. So, next item is operational functions required by statute, ordinance, and resolutions. And before we begin, let me just cue up the meeting. There's no such thing as a dumb question from anyone. If you have questions relative to what we are doing and how we are doing it and why we are doing it, please ask them, because other people probably have those same questions but just are a little bit more timid than you in asking for it. I think it's an imperative that with 3 new members, in particular, that we have a good understanding of what the committee is doing, why we are doing it, and how it relates to the overall mission, vision of the county. So do not be afraid. And do you know, I think we know everybody here. I don't think we need to go through and do the introductions. With that, we're going to take a little bit more time on some of these issues and just go through the why we're doing them and what they are. And we'll start out with the approval of the April 2022 claims and questions cost. And Christy sends those out the week before. And Christy, do you want to just go through what they are, why they're there, and what our role is?
Yeah, one of the things that you'll see on the first monthly meeting is the question, claims, and cost. What that is the accounts payable county register from the previous month.
Excuse me, Gail, why don't you come on up into the middle?
And we send those to you via email. You received that last Tuesday the 3rd. And sometimes I've had questions, why don't you put that on the internet? Why don't we just have it out there? Well, one thing is, it's in a format that's not really easily readable. Secondly is more and more you'll see that there's cyber security and cyber fraud. What has happened in the past with some other municipalities or school district and stuff, once you put big dollar amounts on and you say I'm a vendor, particularly when we're doing construction, they can call and say, I need you to wire me the payment to X. So we don't want to have a vendor out there that's a known vendor and try to have someone with a lot of time on their hands try to mimic them and pretend they're them, so that we send a payment to a wrong address, or we're instructed to send them a payment that was going to someone that is not that actual vendor. So we send them via email, and that's kind of why I'd bring that up in case you're like, well, if you put it out there, I can find it. Yeah, so can everybody else that may not have the same intentions. They have been paid. They're the check numbers. If you have questions, take a look at a check number. If you get that to us, then we're able to take a look and answer any questions for you. But it's for review. They've already been paid, so nobody's waiting for a check until that's done. But it is a review that is pretty nice internal control, and we've had discussions in regards to that in the past with this committee. In July, the auditors will be here, and they kind of go through some of the internal controls that we use. So at this time, it would be for you to approve the April claims and question costs. If any of you are on the ADRC board, they in their bylaws also have it. So even though we're the fiscal agent and the checks are issued by Marathon County, they have their own report, and they also do the same for their specific ADRC bills.
So you were cutting checks, what, every week? And then, so you'll see alphabetically the payments, and so if you go through the entire list, you'll see starting at A going through Z and what's there. So are there any questions relative to the claims or question cost and based on the email that you received last week? If not, what are your wishes? Moved by Supervisor Leahy to approve. Is there a second? Second by Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all is in favor of approval of the claims and question costs will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. All right, interdepartmental transfers. Again, if you could give some background.
So I'm just going to go to the page that we're on. So what happens at we'll be starting the budget process probably in June, July. And what happens is in an annual budget process, the departments develop budgets for their department. That information gets forwarded to county administrator, who then presents a budget to this committee. This committee approves a budget that is forwarded to the county board. In November, the county board will deliberate and approve an annual budget for Marathon County. That is the budget that gets kind of set in stone. And even though any of you that put a home budget together know that even in the best intentions and you set aside money for mortgage or insurance or you're going to replace your water heater, things go awry. You may get a extra tax refund you didn't know you were going to get, or you may have a refrigerator go out on you. So you know that your home budget gets modified, same with the county. So any increase in revenues that were not in your adopted budget, you can move expenses up and down because you can't go over what you've budgeted in expenses. But any increase in revenue and an offsetting increase in expense needs to be approved. We have some that are carryovers, so you may approve a program in 2021, but then we would carry those funds over into 2022. Those are approved by this committee, but they have already been approved in a previous year's budget, so they would not be rolled, we didn't have to go to county board. So there's two levels. Finance committee approves all modifications to the original budget, and those that increase revenues then also would need to go to the full county board, and that's why you see lots and lots of pages in this item, but many of them are not going to be a county board resolution because they are not increasing a revenue and offsetting expenditure. So I'm going to start with the resolution itself. There's two there. One is for highway. They have received increased funding for State Highway 153 construction. So you're going to increase the revenue by $9,500. And then they're going to offset that with time, raw materials, and construction so that they continue to do that project. The other one is our emergency government. They have an agreement with the city of Wausau, so there's additional local government revenue. And then they're offsetting that with the wages and wages and a change in the miscellaneous revenue. So those two are changes to the adopted budget. They will go to county board. Then there's additional ones in that packet. So those are the first two pages. You just see the details of it. Those give you a little bit more description. Is it a new program? Is it a capital improvement? Is it a grant? Is it a continuation? If you see the carry forward, that's money you already approved. We're just carrying it into the next year. And then there was one that is for CPZ, and I think there's an item on here for your discussion that doesn't need to go, it is currently already approved in the adopted 2022 budget in the treasurer's office for a staff member. That position, not the person, is going to move to CPZ. So from the finance standpoint, we're just moving already approved money from one department in wages and benefits to another department. There's no new money coming in. It just moved from one department to the other. So that one will be approved by you. And then there's a bunch of them with letters. Those are all ADRC budget. Those are all ADRC budget transfers. Why are they letters? We ran out of numbers. And we have a very old system. You'll hear about Workday. So Workday is going to allow us to do things that are not odd. We won't use letters anymore. We'll have cost centers and locations and programs. But these are in here for you because the ADRC board is the governing body that approves those budget transfers. But they are in our general ledger. And our auditors, this is really, this is an important thing. We want them to see that before my staff made those entries, that they were reviewed by my committee of jurisdiction and that they were also approved here. So those would not go to county board because their board has approved them. But for our purposes, we want to make sure that you're aware that we've made these changes to the what we would call a modified budget. So we had a bunch of different great examples this month to show you on why and why not there's a budget transfer and the places that it would go. And when we do go to our new system, there's a workflow that goes with that too, so.
I was just going to ask, we're required to publish when we do these transfers, publish to a notification of the change in the budgets in the newspaper as well? No, I think pursuant to the statutes, or do we have to, we have to provide the notice on the budget, but when we do changes over 10, is it over 10%? Do we have to do a public notice? Well, I'll raise that with Mike.
And I usually notify if it's less than 10% of the appropriation unit, but we can take a look.
Okay. So if there's no objection, what I'd like to do is we have later on the agenda the educational presentation under 7C, transition of GIS duties to the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department, CPZ. And the budget transfer is in the packet. And so we will be acting upon that as an interdepartmental transfer, but it's an education program. Without objection, I'd like to take that educational program at this time because I think it's pertinent to the discussion on the transfer. So is there an objection? If not, we'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard and Laurie McSimmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Christy did a great job of giving you the high-level explanation of how you're seeing that transfer in terms of a budget transfer today, and that's on page 8 of 83 of your packet, and I'm sharing it in the on the screens in the room right now. But as Chair Robinson referenced, really what this is we're essentially taking a position within one department, and we're transferring that position, and that individual, in fact, is moving to the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department. And I wanted to give you a little bit of explanation as to why. And to do that, I'm not only going to reference the packet you have today, but I'm also going to pull up a document that all of you on this committee that have been on this committee are very familiar with, and everyone that is new to the committee will certainly become very familiar with it, and that's your annual budget. Specifically, the 2022 budget book, and you'll see, and I think these 2 pages will demonstrate kind of why we're making this change. But the position I'm talking about is that of a parcel mapper. And you'll see, it doesn't say parcel mapper, but it says GIS technician. And that is the parcel mapper currently in the, or at least historically, had been in the treasurer's office. And what is parcel mapping? Great question. I'm going to give you the limited explanation because that's all I have is a limited explanation. But essentially, when we have property that's being transferred between parties, oftentimes that, if you think about a large section of property, for example, we have a 40-acre parcel that's being subdivided. Someone needs to map that because all of you, I'm sure, if you have time to poke around on the county website, we'll see we have a lot of maps available. And those maps are really important for a lot of things, but very important for taxation purposes. And that's why historically it had been in the county treasurer's office that mapper would take in the property description for that transfer and then map on our geographical information systems, GIS, our maps, where that property is being divided. And you'll see it's been a topic of discussion, that it certainly was in 2022 within the Treasurer's Office, that there were a lot of property transfers over the last several years. The market was ripe for transfers, and if anyone has sold a house, you know that, or looking to purchase a house, that market has been very, very active. So, why transfer the parcel mapper position into the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department? It's really twofold. One, it's been very active, and you'll see from the layout of the Treasurer's Office, really no bench strength for that position within that office. We have one GIS technician, and again, that's a very technical position. Individual has to have not only an understanding of parcels and how to read property descriptions, but also has to have certain technical skills relative to the utilization of that GIS system. And then I'll tell you where we're moving it. We're moving it to the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department, where you'll see they have several GIS positions within their planning and surveying arm of the department. So really, it's going to enhance bench strength. So why are we moving this in the middle of the year as opposed to as part of the budget process that Christie referenced? Well, vacancies within departments don't only occur through the budget process, they occur during the year. We had a vacancy, so we were discussing this, and the time was ripe to make that change. In fact, we were very successful in our, through our HR efforts. In our HR department, we did a recruitment, and we have a new replacement for that parcel mapper. They started Monday in the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department. So you'll see we'll have some enhanced bench strength. So in the event we do have an uptick in property transactions, we have other people on that team that can assist in dealing with that backlog. Again, as you read through the annual budget, you'll see we've been dealing with a backlog within our property description area. So this will allow us some enhanced bench strength relative to GIS. We're going to have the same conversation in the near future about the property description. You know, that work is also done in currently in the Treasurer's Office, but I think long-term, it will be more effective for the county to live in a different department. We've been having those conversations since I started as the administrator, looking what's the best way to deliver what is globally referred to as land information services across our departments. It's done differently in very many counties throughout the state. So we're confident this is a step in the right direction. It's not before you for the creation of a new position or the abolishment of an existing position, and you'll see those in the future, as you'll learn more about later today when we talk about roles and responsibilities, because we're not creating a new position or abolishing a new position. We're simply moving that position from one department to another. The reason it's before you is just what Christie highlighted in your packet, and that is we're essentially moving money from one cost center to another. So with that, happy to take any questions on what we're doing, but I thought it was a good opportunity for the new committee to see, as Christie referenced, how are you going to see the various things that come before you? Why do they come before you, and why isn't this a new position request? Because you're going to see those as well. The short answer is we're moving money and we're moving a person, but we're not creating any new positions within the county, which your rules require those things to come through your department and ultimately go to the county board.
Are there any questions of Administrator Leonard? Or, and this has the support of both departments?
Yes, we've talked about that. We've actually been working with the Treasurer's Office, as referenced in the annual budget, about property description and how we have had this influx of transfers that has created some operational challenges for the department for some time, and we've been talking about it for a couple of months. Our recruitment went very well, so we're already well in process.
And this is a critical issue at the end of the year, where we're trying to identify who gets the property tax bills, and if we have delays and backlogs, it confuses it and potentially the wrong people. The former owner gets the tax bill versus the current owner, which generates angst, confusion, and sometimes anger So there's a lot of reasons for us to try to build that bench strength as has been identified and try to avoid those problems going forward.
That's a great point. Great point.
So are there any questions? I do have a question relative to the emergency management. We're carrying over $7,900 from fund balance. Can you explain the fund balance and how that process works in cases like this for the newer members? Christine?
Yeah, I'm just. Oh, you've got it up there. Okay, great. So what happens is that we have, in all of our departments, we have our operating budget, which lives in the general cost center. So finance has its own finance cost center. Emergency government has its own. But what this is a separate account within the general fund that is for emergency government for the city of Wausau. And it is a count that is for 2021 through 2023. This happens with a lot of our grants. Marathon County fiscal year is from January 1st to December 31st, and it works great. Matches a calendar. The problem is that if you get grants or other services from other governments, it becomes a little bit tricky. The state of Wisconsin's fiscal year starts on July 1st and goes through June 30th. So if they're going to give us a grant, it's going to start in the middle of my year. So I'm going to carry over the remaining amount of that grant because it's going to be into my next annual budget year. And that makes sense, except the federal government, its fiscal year starts October 1st through September 30th. And we do get direct federal grants as well. So the federal grant will come in on October 1st. I got 3 months. I then carry over the remaining amount of that federal grant into my next budget year. And in this case, it's a City of Wausau grant that's for 2 years. So it initiated in 2021. What's remaining, as you're seeing on our balance sheet, is that they've got $7,633.50 left. That is being carried over into 2022's annual budget. It was already approved in the 2021. And that's just part of the carryover. And then they also made an agreement with City of Wausau for some services, and that is the new additional revenue of $10,000.
And why that, Christy, again, great job in laying that out. Why that's different than our practice in other departments, when we have a balance at the end of the year, those funds for other departments where they're not tied to grants or contracts for services roll back over into our general fund. You can imagine why that would not be okay with a grant, a contract for services. Wausau has paid for a specific set of services from Marathon County. The fact that they didn't use them all in 2021, the funds that they paid need to carry over into 2022. They cannot lapse back into our general fund for reasons I think that are clear, right? The same thing with a grant. If we took money with the expectation to perform a service, we can't have those funds that we didn't expend doing that service roll back into our general fund. They have to be deployed for the service we agreed to perform.
So are there any questions of Christie or Lance? If not, what are your wishes relative to the intergovernmental transfers or interdepartment, or the budget transfers?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the interdepartmental transfers and budget transfers and move to the county board the required budget transfers.
Is there a second? Seconded by Leahy. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. And again, you'll see a good number of these transfers coming in at the beginning of the year. We're playing catch-up on some of those grants. So there will be a significant number of interdepartmental grants. It'll get less in the year, and at the end of the year, when they're trying to adjust for changes in circumstances, we may see some additional ones, but it's an important function for the committee. Tax deed properties, Kim? So go ahead, Lance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Kim already answered. We don't have any tax deed, and again, you'll learn a lot more about the tax deed process and the various departments that are involved. Kim's office really is on the tail end of that process in the sale of those properties that have been taken through tax deed, and we don't have any properties that are before you for the approval of any sales. But on the front end, we have the treasurer's office that is involved, as well as corporation counsel, and if you look through the budget book again, there's a good write-up within each of those departments about some of the challenges we've dealt with in terms of tax deed. Reference within that budget document is the allocation of funds, excuse me, the allocation of funds to get some title research done, which title research is very important. You can imagine if we're going to take a piece of property for unpaid taxes, several years of unpaid taxes, we have to notify all potential owners. Well, we had a backlog of those properties that has been probably more than a decade in the making, so we wanted to start to make some progress against that. We allocated some funds to get some additional resources in terms of independent title research. We identified 50 properties to begin with. We've received at least the first batch of 10, and I spoke with the deputy treasurer this morning. They've received that initial batch of 10, and in fact, he believes there were more. However, the next step in that process, I should say, is notifying those landowners. So they're generating the letters to send out to those landowners to notify them of the potential of the taking of that property by tax deed. But at this time, we don't have any that require any action by this committee. But you will see those in the near future.
The question is, why do we take properties through tax delinquency? Every year, there's a settlement of the taxes, and Marathon County basically pays the other entities. So when you get your tax bill, the tax bill includes the school district, the county, the city, village, and others. But we pay all those other entities, and we basically become the collection agency or the banker, if you will, on those. And under state statutes, after a period certain, we're allowed to take, after we work with them and try to get them to pay the taxes, we're allowed to take that deed through foreclosure. We can only collect taxes for the last 10 years. And unfortunately, in the past, we've had cases where we've let properties go on and on and on, and we're beyond that 10-year period, and we wind up eating all of those costs, and in essence, it impacts us. There are some recent changes to the tax foreclosure process. What we do is we take them and we'll determine if a department or the county needs it or another governmental unit will need it, or whether we will put it up for sale. Therefore, listening to the tax deeds properties on where people can bid or submit an offer. We tend to try to get our back taxes recovered in that, and under new legislation, under current law, or under historic law, a homestead property, if you lived in that home, they could get the difference between what the back taxes were and the sale price is. The legislature recently expanded that to all properties. That will create some administrative issues that we'll be talking through in this committee over the next few months as we get a better understanding of that. But we've been trying to manage our back taxes to prevent the accumulation of back taxes, and when we take title, I've had a number of constituents who have lost properties through back taxes to the point where there was no value in it for them, and they would have been better served had we taken the property earlier, and they had some value at the time that the county ultimately sold it. So we'll be dealing with that issue going forward. It's one of our last session's work plan items, and we'll be talking about that at our next meeting on what the committee will be doing. Any questions relative to tax deed properties? All right. We will move on to the resolutions authorizing the sale of not to exceed $24,165,000 general obligation corporate purpose bond series 2022A, the capital improvement plan projects. So Administrator and Christie?
I guess I'll start, and then Christie will talk through really more detailed questions. But I'm always a big picture why person. Why is this here? And I'm going to again go to perhaps the most important document you will. Not perhaps. This will be the most important document you'll deal with in the coming months, and that's your annual budget. When you look at the 2022 annual budget document, which is available online, when you get to the last 2 pages, you have the CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan Funding Plan. So you have projects that were identified by the county board, first by staff, but then approved by the county board, that we need to get done, capital projects. And as part of the budget, you not only have the projects, but you have a funding plan that identifies how we are going to pay for these. And again, Christie can talk in more detail, but from a high level, you have CIP fund balance. That's what we were talking about before, when you have balances from individual departments that at the end of the year, they don't spend. Those things roll over, and not the next year, but the year after that, after the audit, we use that rollover money to fund capital needs, a portion of our capital needs. So that's the first column. The second part you have is tax levy. And bridge and culvert aid, for example, there's a specific statute that allows for levy to be issued, tax to be imposed on residents for specific purposes. So we have several different capital projects that are funded by tax levy. That's the second column. Grant funding, we like to have a lot more on the grant funding column, but you can see that, they don't make up a whole lot of the capital stack for our various funding needs. But nevertheless, we record them on our annual budget. And you have this middle column, the green column in the budget book, borrowing. That's what we're going to talk about here today, and it's in your packet. You not only have the form template resolutions, but you also have a really nice document from our financial advisor, PFM, that lays out kind of the process by which you go through when you're seeking to borrow money. But we're going to talk more about, these are the capital projects that were approved, the funding plan then that was approved during the budget, and now we're talking about how do we affect the borrowing to carry out those projects. Just to close out this page, you'll see the other part of the other couple columns. There have been a couple of people that have asked questions about what's affectionately known as the wheel tax, the vehicle registration fee. That here you can see we projected to bring in 2022 $2,960,000 through that registration fee, and you can follow it across. What does that go to pay? And it is bituminous surfacing, asphalt paving. So all of that money goes to that project. Then you have this other column that we can talk about in the future when these projects come through. But those are sources outside, again, of the standard projects that we have. Then we have some big projects on our capital funding plan that we know are on the horizon, or we believe to be on the horizon based on the direction of the board, but we don't have a strategy as of yet how to fund them. Those are unfunded, not moving forward at this time. And you'll see a couple of big ones that we'll talk about more in the future. The first is a joint county facility for highway parks, potentially emergency management. The Regional Forensic Science Center, commonly referred to as the Regional Morgue, the second project, and then the design for that project was the next column there. So you'll see, again, these two pages lay out a lot of information in terms of not only what are the project needs, but also what was the funding plan that was approved through the annual budget. So with that, you want me to keep this up? And we'll kick it over to Christie to talk about we'll start with the 24 million, and the first question I'll have for Christie, I'll tee it up for you. Why, that we approved in the budget $23,827,939 of projected projects. Why are we asking for the first item to borrow just in excess of 24 million?
Money's not free, Lance. That's why. No, what happens is, and actually in the offering statement that we've put together, it's a draft statement, of that one, we don't borrow to the dollar, the penny, so you're gonna round up because they sell them in lots of 5,000. So in essence, the estimated use of funds is gonna be the 23,830,000. And then there's the cost of insurance, underwriting, financial advisors, disclosure attorney, and rating with Moody's, which is another little over $300,000. So it's, when you're getting a mortgage for a house, you're gonna pay about $2,000 to $4,000. Well, this is borrowing 100 times what your house would have most likely been a mortgage for, so it's gonna be relative to that, which is 100 times more than the $3,000 that you would have paid for that house. So it's really the underwriting cost, the cost of putting the borrowing together. One item before we go in, you see it's a general obligation bond. General obligation means it's a general obligation of Marathon County, and it would be paid by the ad valorem taxes or property taxes of the county. So that's GO note. So if you're looking at kind of rates and you're wondering about that, this would be your general obligation bond for Marathon County. Both of them are, they're not, they're pretty much run-of-the-mill municipal issues. There's nothing fancier or exciting about them as far as municipal bond market. But if you go back to that, Lance, if you want to put that CIP schedule back up, what I wanted to provide you information on, Lance said when we, at the end of the year, if there's undesignated, unassigned fund balance in the general fund or any other funds that provide tax levy service, which in the governmental fund, so it's usually general fund and the social improvement fund, any money that's left over that we don't have to assign to either a carry forward, like those grants, we have to have that money somewhere to save it, to move it, or for outstanding other commitments that we have, that money we use to pay capital improvement projects. It's 20, so for the 2022 CIP, the 2020 financials were completed, the audit was completed, and what was left over, we then apply to pay down our capital improvement plan. So it's very tiny, but you should see on there, on the CIP funding portion of that plan, 8.3, almost 8.4 would be on the second page. Yep, and I hope it's the same numbers I've got up here, but 8.4 million of county dollars goes to pay for those projects. So those got paid also. Then you'll see the borrowing column of a little less than 23.9 million, little 23.8. That is other projects that we will fund by borrowing. But if you want to think about it, those are most of our general projects. If you take a look, we're doing HVAC, we're remodeling the healthcare center, we're doing the steam tunnel, we're going to move social services, we're going to redo all the parking lots at the North Central Healthcare. If you take a look at those two columns alone, you've got a little over $32 million. Now, when you're looking at borrowing for a house or you're going to go do something, if you combine the 8.4 and the 23.8 million, you get up $32 million in projects. Over a quarter of that is being paid by the county out of our own kind of savings account. That 8.3 million is dollars we have. Instead of spending it or using it on something else, we're going to pay cash to get some of this stuff done. And that is a policy that has been in place here since 1991. It's served us well. That is why we can get things done. But what we're doing is completing and some of those other major projects to get that North Central Healthcare Campus done and some of those other things. So if you want to look at it that way, they're big numbers, but we are going to leverage some of our own funds at 25, a quarter of that, 26% of our own dollars to make sure that we're getting those projects done and we're keeping our buildings up to date and moving forward with some of those larger projects.
Supervisor Leahy, would you like to just talk about what we did with the KIP last, you led a work group and
Yeah, I can try. That feels like 10 years ago. Last year, we really tried to look at the capital improvement project plan with fresh eyes. Some of our policies, internal policies, were just a little bit outdated. We hadn't considered them in a while. It kind of started because we took a look at some of our capital projects that just weren't getting done. I think the library roof was used forever as an example. You know, the roof needed fixing for a decade, and we just we didn't get to it. So we took a look at the plan. At one point, there was a CIP committee made up of supervisors and citizen members. We officially abolished that committee because it wasn't really serving the things weren't getting done in the best way possible, in the most efficient way possible. You know, Christie's used the example of your own home a lot today, and that played into the capital improvement as well. The cost of everything continues to rise, so as you put off projects, those expenses just get higher and higher. So that kind of played into our acceptance of borrowing money, where in past years we might not have. We also looked at procurement policies. With COVID, with supply chain, we had to look at the dollar amount that department heads could make decisions for themselves. We had to look at timelines. Could we order something earlier than we normally would have so that we would have it in time, things like that. Another issue was software and technology. A lot of things are moving from, here's the CD-ROM that I have in my hand that I can use for 10 years. It's moving into accounts, annual payments that you have to have for all employees. So that really altered how we pay for things too. Had to keep that more in mind, that expenses were going to shift and change because you no longer necessarily owned that product. It was a service you were paying for. That was kind of a lot of information. Is that what you were looking for, Chair Robinson?
yes, thank you. But I think one of the things to keep in mind too is that we're budgeting tighter and tighter. And Administrator Leonard has, you know, in several departments such as the Sheriff's Department and Highway, we don't fully fund the payroll section, anticipating that there will be vacancies. But what that does is it gives us a tighter budget, but it reduces the potential for future fund balances. And that will catch up to us in the context of our available funds for capital projects. But we are playing that catch up on those projects because the jail and the library are two great examples of deferred maintenance. Was not avoided maintenance, but rather more expensive maintenance because we let the problems lag, and we had much more structural damage at both facilities than we would have had we addressed it in a timely manner. And I think we're working closely with Terry and his staff at facilities and facilities management in trying to identify what those projects are and deal with it more like a business would going forward. So are there questions relative to the KIP supervisor or Chair Gibbs?
Yeah, I was going to give just a little more context. I mean, historically, this county, and I've served on this board now 16 years. Historically, we only utilized, and this is going back and dating myself, but historically we'd only utilize the CIP funding, which was the rollover from our cash balances from 2 years prior into the CIP projects, and that's the limit that the county would authorize as far as use for capital improvement projects. And that got us really historically got us into trouble. It got us into trouble in the scenarios as the chair has announced, the jail and the facilities and the need for fixing that capital asset. The same is true with the fixing of the roof of the library. By only utilizing the CIP funds to fund capital projects, we were then using the CIP committee to rank those projects and come in with a ranking and say, okay, whatever these dollars will pay for, after the CIP committee has ranked projects, we would fund down to whatever that level was. And that was it. And didn't matter how big of need there was potentially for a roof repair, a replacement of a system that has outlived its usefulness, is past replacement time. We wouldn't historically fund any of those. We've gotten past that and said, look, if we're going to have all of these assets that the county owns and we need to maintain them, we need to maintain them as you would your own home. You don't wait until the roof is leaking to the point that you've got water buckets in your living room. You replace that roof now when it's time to replace it. And so that's what has led to a catch-up, if you will, and that's why you're seeing an amount of $24 million needed to borrow to catch up with some of these projects that are sitting there. And we've utilized the professional services of our maintenance department to better identify those capital projects and the need that those projects need and when they need to be replaced at the timeliness.
Are there any questions relative to the process? If not, Christie, can you talk specifically? We have a resolution before us today relative to the borrowing. There are a lot of appendixes that are not filled in because you want to walk through the process.
I think the timetable is in the packet too. Awesome. So what happens is first thing that happens is you approve the CIP plan in November, and then we go out to do an initial resolution, which has already been passed in March, and now you're going to do your sale and award resolutions in May. And what happens is this morning I was on the call with Moody's Investor Service. The county has a AA1 rating. Every time you go out to borrow, we meet with the analyst from Moody's. That happened this morning. He takes it to committee and tries to, hopefully will reaffirm our AA1. Asked a lot of questions on the economy, on how stable is the county, what are you seeing for revenues, what are you doing in regards to Arpa money. You know, we talked about that. How is the employment environment in the area? And right now, many of our things look pretty stable. We really haven't had a lot of anything from tornadoes, knocked on wood, to just major company disruptions, to any infrastructure issues. So that's really positive for us. After that, we're asking this committee to approve these resolutions. Today there's 2 in the format that they are, so that we can move forward. Then what's going to happen is on May 24th, we actually send these out to bid. So because they're so large and you buy in blocks of 5,000, most times the people that are interested in this are institutional investor, banks, pension funds, those types of people. Not typically, it's not something that you're not going to call up and buy the money from them, but it may be in a 401k or retirement, or portion of what you may be investing in. That company that you work with may be holding a portion of this as part of the municipal bonds. They're going to sell those on the morning of May 24th, and they're going to take bids. And we've been pretty successful in getting from 3 to 5 bids. Then what will happen is PFM will evaluate them and take the lowest true interest cost on the bids, and they will provide those to this committee, which is, you'll see on, the next thing that happens on Tuesday is that there will be a meeting of this committee prior to the county board. You will see the bids, you will see the recommended bid award, the winning bid. You will accept the resolution with all of the other parts put in place, because that's really going to happen that day. You would then approve it with the awarding the bid to whatever institutional investor typically is. That then gets forwarded to county board, and then they will adopt the award resolution. So there's still things to do in this process, but the format value of the resolution is before you today for approval. And then typically this committee's chosen to accept the bid on the night of May 24th after those come in and there's a recommendation from the finance advisor.
So the action or the issue before us today is to give, in essence, it's approving the resolutions with the understanding that it's a preliminary approval subject to the appendixes being filled in, and we will deal with those at our next meeting on the 24th. So are there any questions? If not, what are the wishes of the committee? We are looking for a motion to advance the resolutions, and again, with the understanding that we'll be dealing with it again on the 24th. Supervisor Leahy?
Advance the resolutions as written.
Is there a second? Seconded by Gibbs. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Next, we'll move on to resolution awarding the sale not to exceed $19,225,000 of general obligation healthcare project building bonds series 2022B. Administrator Leonard and Christie.
I'll be very brief here, but this was referenced at the county board in some of our discussions recently. This is our work, and Christie referenced it relative to the healthcare center, multi-phased process. We have one borrowing in addition to this that yet remains of the initial $67 million authorization from the board for the project, which took place in 2018. Terry Kaiser is here from Facilities and Capital Management if you have any questions that are specific, but essentially it's the same process that we've just all discussed relative to the capital projects, but specific to the North Central Healthcare renovation that was approved by the county board in 2018. This project, and Terry can correct me if I'm wrong, but it certainly is a large portion of the borrowing. It relates to some projects relative to renovation of current nursing home space, as well as some treatment space for behavioral health needs. The last borrowing that remains, a little bit in excess of $3 million at this point, is for a final demolition of a portion of a building, and then really cosmetic and parking lot work around the facility. Currently, as Christie alluded to, interest rates are increasing. We've been very fortunate throughout the project to have to secure some very advantageous borrowing rates. Likewise, we're running into not only the increase in interest rates, but increased costs of materials and construction costs. So there was a question at the county board because we didn't have final numbers at the time, what our projection was for overages to this point, provided we go out for sale and award of these building bonds. We're looking at about $2.5 million at this point. We're going to continue to work on that to try to identify some alternative sources for additional funding for the project. You heard about some of those alternative sources that we've been successful in the past. We secured a $5 million grant from the state of Wisconsin through the Building Commission for the delivery of mental health services and the expansion of mental health services on the campus. But that's where we are right now in terms of the project. So if there's any additional questions, certainly happy to take them, and I'll pass them on to Terry, because that's probably who's better positioned to answer them. But really, in terms of process, it's the identical process that Christie laid out relative to item 6B1 as it related to the capital improvement plan generally approved in the 2022 budget.
Terry, is there anything that you'd like to add? Are there any questions? Again, it's a similar resolution, taking it to the county board. Any questions? Go ahead, Gail.
How long is our contract with the Langlade and Lincoln counties? Does it cover the term of? How long is the contract that we have with the other counties that we're essentially buying or providing the services, but we're providing all the buildings?
Great question, and essentially the contract has a 5-year, and it's an intergovernmental agreement as opposed to a contract. And I think the important thing for the intergovernmental agreement is it's really not Marathon County providing the services. That intergovernmental agreement provided for under chapters 51.42 as well as chapter 59 it's the mechanism through which North Central Healthcare is created. North Central Healthcare is essentially a multi-county county department. That's the term that's envisioned under chapter 51, specifically section 5142. So North Central exists as I don't want to say independent entity, but it is its own entity as opposed to a specific department, a single county of Marathon County. So North Central operates out of each of those 3 counties. So there is a facility with respect to North Central Healthcare. They have space within Lincoln and Langlade that they utilize to deliver services. Certainly, the Marathon County facility is the largest of those facilities, but each individual county is responsible for those specific buildings that North Central Healthcare operates out of. So I hope that answers your question. The intergovernmental agreement has a 5-year provision that it envisions the counties looking at that agreement every 5 years. I will say that before 2016, the new agreement in 2016, that was an indefinite intergovernmental agreement. It had no end date. So we did put in place, beginning in 2016, and it's been in each of the iterations of the agreement moving forward, a 5-year period, not with the intent that we envision the entity going away, North Central going away, but that it gives us reason as member owners to sit down, talk about any issues we may have, and update that agreement, because otherwise it's been, I think, I'll speak for myself, but certainly I think it's been the county's experience that when you don't frequently sit down and look at those things, you can have an agreement that becomes out of touch with respect to the county's needs.
But we do essentially share the greater burden of the capital for the facility compared to the other counties, right?
We share, Marathon County is ultimately responsible for all of the capital at that facility. Lincoln County is responsible for any of the capital at their facility. Langlade would be, of course, responsible for any buildings located within Langlade County. That said, the project envisioned in 2018 was that North Central was going to be able to service that debt from operational efficiencies that were envisioned through primarily the renovations on the nursing home for the Mountain View Care Center, which is a specific Marathon County program, but also as it relates to the behavioral health modifications through increased efficiency and increased revenues. There's certainly some additional work that needs to be done as a result of the pandemic. Certainly some things have changed, as everyone can recognize, relative to nursing homes. Censuses are down, revenues down while expenses actually increased. We've had similar experiences at North Central relative to behavioral health, but that was how the project was initially envisioned. We may need to alter the terms of the payback. The county, as Christy alluded to in each of the resolutions before you, our borrowing term is generally for amounts this large, 20 years. We're prohibited by statute to have a longer term. That doesn't prohibit us from having North Central service that debt over a longer period.
Are there any other questions? Chair Gibb.
Yeah, I would just add that a big portion of that $67 million was for Mountain View Care Center itself, which is exclusively Marathon County's nursing home. So understand that, you know, a large portion of that 67 million was exclusively for the nursing home itself.
Oh, yes, but please come up and use the microphone.
Thank you. In the previous item, the CIP, there's a line item, 9,662,000 for steam removal at NCA at the North Central Healthcare Phase 3. And I'm wondering if I can get more detail on what that is, and then also the reasoning why that's not part of the why that's not part of the NCH budget, and if that's going to be paid back by that institution or if that's going to be paid back by the county. Thank you.
Steam removal is for the, I guess we call it the A and B building, so it is part of the building that North Central will be moving out of, and the county will be moving departments into. So, is it part of this project? No. No, it's part of CIP, because it is actually part of the boilers and steam that is in there is original to the building. So that equipment is 1972 vintage. So that is just a general update of the mechanicals of the building that is currently there.
So the facility, the campus has multiple tenants, of which North Central is one. And there are other tenants that are in some of the other buildings. And I think that what Terry is referencing is that some of those costs will be borne, you know, they're the responsibility of other entities. The plan is to take social services down there and other entities to locate them onto the campus. The health department is there. Is special education still is there. So there are a number of other entities that are using different buildings and parts of the campus.
So if I understand right, it's not part of North Central Healthcare because they're not going to be in the building anymore. But is that the main heating plant then? Is that what that line item refers to, or what specifically is that work?
No, there is several heating plants now. Basically, the North Central Healthcare, what we did is we took all of the buildings that are on that campus and we divided it so that there's a line in the sand that North Central will operate on one side of the line and the Marathon County will operate on the other side of the line. So all of the utilities and everything that go to North Central Healthcare will be accountable to North Central Healthcare. Everything on the other side is Marathon County. So the heating plant, there will be 2. Actually, there'll probably be like 3 or 4 because it's more cost effective now. It's going away from steam. It's all about energy efficiency as well. So going away from the steam plant, we can heat now with hot water, just like you would your house. So it's more effective or efficient. It's more efficient to put in smaller boiler plants than to put in a big, large central utility plant for the buildings that Marathon County has. For the stuff that North Central has, it was more efficient to put in a main boiler plant. So yes, there's 2 plants. One is for the Marathon County side, and the Marathon County side will actually have 3 smaller plants because they're more efficient, and the North Central side will have 1.
Thank you. That answered my question.
Any other questions? If not, what are the wishes? Do we have a motion? No, we don't. What are the wishes relative to this? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion to approve the general obligation bond authority for the 19 million, whatever, 125,000?
220.
225, excuse me.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Educational presentations, these items will not be, they're on the agenda as educational presentations. There will be no action taken on them today. The first item is the American Rescue Plan project submission update. Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And really my goal today in providing this is we're not going to get into the project submissions in detail. That's going to come in the very near future. But because a number of individuals on the committee are new, and I wanted to try to bring you up to speed as quickly as possible. And a lot of this is, I apologize, it's going to be homework more than me going through it today, but point you in the direction of where you can find additional information relative to the American Rescue Plan Act, and try to go through relatively quickly the work that this committee and the full board have done in trying to articulate a process through which the county would make determinations relative to the $26.3 million that it was allocated through the American Rescue Plan Act moving forward. So the first thing I want to talk about is when the county started, and Chair Robinson can elaborate, but it sought to get public input on that process. What were not only the needs that the public saw with respect to the pandemic in part, but also just general needs that the county should evaluate perhaps funding through its allocation, and also what that process should look by for evaluating those. So there were listening sessions that this committee on behalf of the county board held. They held 3 listening sessions, one here in the assembly room. They held one in Edgar and one in Hatley to essentially gather information from the public in terms of what those needs looked like. And I'll pull up a document here where we can start to see what that looks like in terms of an ARPA project request overview. And this was a presentation done by Chair Robinson to the full board. And I'll give you the date of the presentation, which you can look up on the county website to find all this information at a future date. And that's January 25th of 2022. This was a presentation to the full board. So if you go to what I've done is I've gone to the county calendar and found that meeting date, and I'm just looking through the packet. So again, baseline information, we received the $26.3 million. The presentation talks about the available uses according to the final rule, and there's of course been changes to that moving forward. But I want to just very quickly talk about the listening sessions. We not only did the listening sessions, but we had a survey that was available to the general public for them to essentially voice their concerns or thoughts relative to those funds and the process that should be utilized to expend them. So you'll see, this is a summary slide, but we had information that was gathered relative to everything from childcare, broadband, looking at infrastructure, economic development. All these things were areas that the public identified as potential investments that they were interested in evaluating through the American Rescue Plan Act and the process by which the board would expend those funds. So again, as I referenced, the county board ultimately tasked HR Finance with the job of putting together what the application process was going to look like, and this summary slide does that very well. It starts with looking at and completing a form that's available on the county website, and I'll talk about where that is. You can go to the Marathon County website, and when you go to the home page, you click on the Administrator Department, and there's a link for ARPA funding request process, and that allows you to complete the ARPA project request form. But essentially what that form begins with is a process that ultimately gets routed to the Administrator's Department. So we then, county administration, is tasked with reviewing those submissions, and particularly for those submissions that are coming from outside entities, if it's appropriate, make sure that an appropriate department head from within the county, one of our 24 departments, evaluates the submission and provides additional information if appropriate. It was envisioned that administration would review those and prepare them for evaluation by this committee. In terms of evaluation by this committee, you would receive, as you can see in the kind of the red bar here, This committee would review the applications, and the lead applicant would provide a short presentation to this committee for purposes of better understanding the committee, the application, excuse me. Ultimately, this committee is tasked with forwarding, as it deems appropriate, proposals to the county board for consideration for funding, but the decision of whether or not to fund those projects ultimately lives with the county board. In terms of criteria or considerations that the HR Finance and Property Committee identified to look at as it starts to evaluate those, you'll see the summary here. I'm going to paraphrase a number of them. The economic benefit to the taxpayer in the county, really trying to get at the idea of return on investment. One of the big things that was discussed, and certainly Mr. Chair, feel free to interject, but this idea of trying to address some of the financial challenges that the county has. When you look at, and you'll certainly become more accustomed to this, but the impact of tax levy limits, and as Christie referenced before, how we've historically funded capital needs, whether or not that is sustainable long-term, as Chair Robinson referenced, as we budget tighter within all of our departments, the amount of money that's rolling over into our available capital improvement budgets is going to continue to shrink. So trying to utilize American Rescue Plan Act dollars to get at some of those financial challenges and perhaps be proactive through identifying return on investment was one common theme. The second one, alignment with strategic and comprehensive plans. I've done a lot of talking about, how staff really use those plans that the board develops and approves to drive our daily work. No different here, trying to align our allocation of American Rescue Plan Act funding to those plans and those needs was a common theme. Opportunity for partnerships. I think the flip side of looking for funding partnerships is, and this was a theme, we don't want to duplicate an already existing funding program. So I'll give you an example, small business assistance. The state of Wisconsin, it was just, I believe I read a news report talking about the state of Wisconsin investing a very significant amount of its Arpa funding for small business assistance, which is great. Those businesses were certainly impacted by the pandemic. But if there's already an existing program at the state level, this committee has talked about perhaps it's not the best use of our American Rescue Plan Act funding to duplicate that program locally, and instead we want to make sure that we funnel those individuals to those already existing programs. Another good example is housing assistance and small business assistance. The Community Development Block Grant, Marathon County applied for and received $1 million through the Community Development Block Grant. Half that was for housing assistance for individuals that were renting or own their own home that were impacted by the pandemic. We want to make sure we funnel them to that already existing revenue source, as opposed to perhaps duplicating through additional, our own allocation of American Rescue Plan Act dollars. The other half, that other $500,000, was for small business assistance. So we already have that pot of money that's available for that purpose. So again, opportunity for partnerships is the idea of leveraging our ARPA dollars with perhaps other municipalities' ARPA dollars or other grant dollars. The flip side of that is not duplicating an already existing funding program. And then the last, I think, speaks for itself, but its benefits to the citizens of Marathon County. The idea, again, being we want to make sure that our ARPA allocations actually have impact. I think Chair Robinson has frequently referenced, we receive these dollars, they are one-time dollars, and the original intent of those dollars is to negate or mitigate some of the impacts of the pandemic and not to lose sight of that. So that's the quick overview of the process that the county board has gone through in terms of getting public input, in terms of how do we want to make determinations about how to use this $26.3 million that we're going to receive, and we've received the first half. We're going to receive the second half shortly. And the last thing I wanted to talk about and this is really going to your packet from your previous meeting, which was April 12th. I just want to show you and this was as of April 12th, and I envision we'll certainly have additional applications, but certainly I was surprised with the number of project requests that we received in that short time period that we've had that ARPA request document available. You'll see at the top of this spreadsheet, and Noor Ali Hassan put this together for my office, you'll see we have several projects that we've labeled approved at the top. The county board had allocated some funding for broadband expansion. We had some courtroom and jail audio-video enhancements that were already, monies were set aside, lease of the community partner campus space, and then the Discover Wisconsin, Uniquely Wisconsin tourism campaign. And then the additional funds for the PTO balance liability reduction. Those were already approved, so they've already gone through and been, essentially those funds have been encumbered by the county board. That doesn't, of course, mean that you're gonna spend all of them, all of those dollars, and you'll see later in your packet, we provided an update on what we actually utilized relative to the PTO balance liability reduction plan that we had developed, and it's significantly less than that $500,000. But nevertheless, those dollars were encumbered. The remaining pending projects, those are the projects that are gonna be presented to you in the next, I believe we'll probably have to take at least 2 meetings. If everyone gets 10 minutes, you'll be there for a considerable amount of time, but nevertheless, you have 19 million in additional projects that have come in terms of requests across 22 new projects. So a lot of projects requests have come in. Certainly many of them are internal requests. You'll see several on there from the Parks Department. We have some from Conservation Planning and Zoning, Sheriff's Office, but we also have some from external entities. You'll see that we have a request from the City of Mosinee for some work to be done there. We have a request from the Village of Marathon City for some infrastructure development. But those are the project requests that we've received to this point that administration has compiled. We're now going through and trying to make sure that to the best of our ability, the applications are sufficiently explanative so that you can make an intelligent decision about whether or not to fund them. But then they're gonna come to this committee in the next couple of meetings. I don't know if there's anything
Can you
else.
scroll up to the eligible activity categories, the public health? I think that was
I
early.
think that is in,
I think it's early in the presentation, isn't it?
right here.
Right. Those are the categories where we can use it. Public health, obviously responding to the pandemic, negative economic impacts to individuals and/or businesses, services to disproportionately impacted communities, premium pay for employees, government employees that work through the pandemic, infrastructure. Infrastructure includes broadband, water sewer projects, revenue replacement or lost revenue, and I'll let Chair Gibbs talk a little bit about that. And then we're allowed to take out some of the costs for administrative. But we have until December 31st, 2024 to encumber or commit those funds, and we have until December 31st of 2026 to spend it. And I think if you looked in your packet and looked at the PTO, we allocated $500,000 and we spent 158,000. So we will need to basically readjust, and so we want to make sure if we're encumbering the funds that we're going to spend them, because if we don't spend them, we'll lose them. But Chair Gibbs, if you want to talk about the lost revenue.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the categories that was just spelled out, the one of them that gives the county the most flexibility is the lost revenue calculation. And lost revenue calculation, the Treasury has come out with some final regulations on April 1st of 2022. And it gives a formula that says, all right, calculate the amount of revenue that you had in your base period, 2019 and 2018. And whatever that base period is, if your revenue does not increase by 5.2%, then you can utilize the difference between what your growth or what your revenue is in 2020 and what it would have been if you had a 5.2% growth. And that difference is what is considered to be lost revenue. And that lost revenue then is recalculated for 2021, 2022, and 2023. Once you have that lost revenue calculated for all of those years, it will give you the amount of the, I will give you a figure. And that figure says that well, two things. Whatever that number is considered lost revenue, and therefore is usable by the county for virtually any program that is legally authorized for the county to do. So if the county has the ability to run a program, and it does not have to be spelled out in any of the other areas, but if the county is authorized to do it, then under the lost revenue scenario, the county can utilize ARPA funds to do that. The reason that it's critical, again, it doesn't require the scrutiny or doesn't carry the scrutiny that the other areas that the ARPA funding legislation required with it, and therefore is not quite, well, is not subject to recapture as long as you provide that it is a qualified and authorized program that the county can do. There is some limits. There's several prohibited items that the county cannot utilize it for. It cannot utilize it for debt retirement. It cannot use it for litigation settlement. It cannot use it to put into a rainy day fund. And but other than those limits, it can't use it to pay off pension liabilities. So other than those limits, if it is qualified under the lost revenue calculation, it is usable pretty much for anything that the county can do. Now, the other option is that the final rule that the Treasury came out with on April 1st said that you can, if you don't want to use the calculation for lost revenue using the complicated formula with going through with a 5.2% increase each year, you can use an automatic standard $10 million of lost revenue. And so if you use the 10 million, then in our case, the other 16.3 would have to be spent in the other categories. The reason that it's critical under what we have, what the Finance Department has calculated to this point is that we should be able to utilize all 26.3 million of the ARPA under the lost revenue calculation if the subsequent years are similar to the lost revenue that was identified in the 2020 year. 2020 year's lost revenue was 8.3 million. And so 1 year alone of the 4 is 8.3. And so if the other preceding years are similar in the amount of lost revenue calculation, we will fully be able to cover all 26.3 million of ARPA funding under the lost revenue calculation.
Christie.
I wish Supervisor Gibbs was the Treasury, because he explained very eloquently lost revenue, and it took 4 tiny, small typed pages in the federal regulations to explain the same thing for me to do the worksheet. So you're not going to get a better explanation of that. The other thing with the 10 million, Marathon County will be receiving 26 million, But most municipalities, particularly those in Marathon County that got their own allocation, and many counties in Wisconsin did not get 10 million in total. So they were able to elect the $10 million lost revenue, and that will take their entire amount for them and move it to lost revenue. So we did receive a larger amount, but consider some of the municipalities in Marathon County, neighboring counties, their full allocation was not 10 million. So they're easiest thing in the world, they click a button and say, I'm taking my full amount. They won't get 10. They, you know, if it was 9.6, they'll be able to do. So we just want to make you aware that for some of those municipalities, clicking that button meant that their entire allocation could move to lost revenue. For us, we're going to capture it, but we will do it through the revenue loss projections that are done. Also, with it being in lost revenue, revenue replacement, you are still able to do the other items in the other categories. It just eliminates some of the strings that are attached to it. And lastly, the final rule also changed some of the numbers on the guidance for the other uses. So you may see a project coming through at category 1.7. Category 1.7 has been eliminated. It's probably 1.4 or 1.8. They changed the nuances of the rules, so I just want to make you aware of that.
So the allocations to the remaining communities is approximately the same as what the county received when you look at the, so there was, you know, some townships didn't receive much, but it's based on population and other factors. Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, just to add to what Christy was saying, I think 54 counties in the state of Wisconsin received less than $10 million. So they will qualify if they utilize the default $10 million option. They can use that 100% of their ARPA allocation under the lost revenue calculation. And then in Marathon County, there was only 2 municipalities that received over 10 million, and that would be the city of Wausau and Marathon County that received over 10 million. All the rest of the municipalities, whether it be city, village, town, received less than 10 million. So each one of those, if they chose to elect, and that election had to be in on April 30th of this year, that election had, if they made that election, it qualifies all of their ARPA funds for pretty much any utilization other than the eliminated requirements or eliminated defined prohibitations. They can use it for anything that the municipality can utilize, can do legally. So you have two restrictions, one being the federal government restrictions, but you also have to comply with state statutes. So, so even though it may qualify under federal regulations, you need to be aware that state statute may prohibit a municipality, in this case, for example, the county, from doing a program that the state or the federal may have authorized under ARPA.
All right, this is before you for education, and again, I think to set the very broad parameters of where we are, we will have a lot of work as a committee. We will need to take that money or the request. We will need to determine how much of that 26 million we want to allocate toward this round. If you want to do all of it, you've lost all flexibility going forward. So my recommendation will be is that we not commit all of those funds, but rather look at it over the next couple of years. And you know, you will make that decision. It will go to the county board. It will require a 2/3 vote of the county board. So the likelihood that we're going to do something controversial is pretty limited. But we wanted to just set the stage so you had a better understanding of what we were looking at. And again, we'll need to set aside some time. Any questions? Ann?
Does the money have to be spent by 2023 or allocated by 2023?
It has to be allocated, encumbered. Now, there's a difference between allocated and encumbered. There has to be a contract or a commitment, formal commitment, by December 31st, 2024. It must be actually spent by 2026. So we have time, but again, you're not going to want to get into a situation like we were with PTO where we we basically spent, 30-some% of the money that we had encumbered. So you want to do those check-ins and make sure that you're not losing it because of the inability to spend the money. And there's been a lot of discussion in the Wisconsin Counties Association about the ability to enter into contracts because of supply side issues. It's something that we have to be aware of, and while we have until 2024, we shouldn't be waiting until the end of 2023 to encumber those dollars, but we don't have to do it all up front.
And I believe, just to build on what Chair Robinson said, and I'm sure Board Chair Gibbs will correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding, it's not only that you need to, that you encumber by the end of 2024, when you have to have them spent. If it's a project, you can't just prepay a bill. The project needs to be completed by the end of 2026. So you can't enter into a construction project that's going to be 10 years in length and front end that contract. You need to actually have the project you're paying for completed by that 2026 deadline, the end of 2026. And the thought process, as I understand it, is again to something that Chair Robinson has talked frequently about. The intent of the money is to impact or mitigate the impacts of the pandemic. They don't want, as Chair Gibbs referenced, the money to sit in a rainy day fund waiting to be spent at some future date. It's get this money out in the economy, stimulate the economy, and have those projects completed by the end of 2026.
Chair Gibbs?
Yeah, just to expand upon that, WCA has looked at, where's the capacity to provide, major construction. When you talk about the federal infrastructure bill and the amount of dollars that are coming in there, the amount of Arpa funding that is available through a lot of municipalities. So the capacity in the economy to actually provide building or construction and materials is going to be a challenge, and so we need to be cognizant of that and plan for that, so that again, we don't get caught with unspent money that's going to have to go back to the federal government. Utilize those dollars where we can utilize them to assist in taxpayers in Marathon County and the long-term economic benefit of the county.
To put it in perspective, there's a concern about fiber being available for broadband expansion. Just one area where if we were to be aggressively going out and funding the installation of fiber for expansion, we would want to make sure that the vendor had a reliable source going forward. But there are multiple supply side issues that we just have to be aware of.
I just heard anecdotally that if you want fiber now, you need to order it today, and hopefully your delivery is 2 years from now. So it's going to be an issue, and it's something that we need to be aware of.
So again, this is informational. We wanted to set the stage for you to help and look for more information. The next item is the roles and the responsibilities of the committee. We put in, Michael had pulled out of the county ordinance, chapter 2, the roles and responsibilities. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today. I know that a couple people have commitments that they need to get to. Typically, this committee functions, historically, there were always 2 meetings a month. And they were action items, and what we found was we weren't able to focus in on critical long-term tasks. So last session, we basically said the first meeting of the month, this meeting, would be our action item, and the second meeting would be primarily educational, and let us look at some of those longer-term issues, the capital improvement planning process. So at the next meeting, we will be bringing in the department heads who have responsibility, reporting relationships to us, and let them give an overview of the Corporation Council, the clerk's office, the finance department, the facilities, and talk about those. We'll talk a little bit about the action plan that we developed last time and what the committee can do. And you can read through this, but we'll be spending some time on the strategic plan that was included in the packet with responsibilities. We're not going to get into that today, but Michael, do you want to just cover some of the statutory responsibilities that we have today?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. If you take a look at the county board rule regarding HR Finance Committee, which is on the screen, there are actually some specific statutes that are referenced in our rule, 6590, 893, and 5962. I just wanted to do a brief highlight of some of these statutes and what they mean or what they call for. 6590 is the statute that talks about budgeting, municipal budgeting, and in this statute, a municipality includes a county. Some other places in the statutes, municipalities don't include counties, but in this case, it is a county. And 6590 sub 5 is referenced in your county board rule that establishes this committee because sub 5 talks about, first of all, when you're amending or changing a budget that's already been approved by the board, what kind of action needs to happen. And typically, pursuant to your rules, what will happen is that this committee will review those allocations and forward them to the full board for a 2/3 vote for approval. The second thing that 6590 sub 5 talks about is that a county board can actually authorize a standing committee to transfer funds between budgeted items of individual county offices or departments. So in this case, our county has, by rule, elected this committee to be the committee that can authorize transfer of budget items in a department between budget lines. So that's something that you might see quite often actually at these meetings. 5962 is a statute that talks about investment authority of a county board and indicates a county board can delegate the authority to manage investments. In this case, one of the duties of the HR Finance Committee is actually to oversee the county's investments. So that's another thing that you may see come up on an agenda. The last statute that is referenced is 89380, and that's the governmental claims statute. As the county's attorney, I hope that we have very few claims, but they do happen from time to time, and there is a procedure outlined in 89380 about how claims have to be presented. Typically, they'll go to the county clerk. We'll forward them to our insurer, but if a claim is presented, often we'll be asked as a committee to take an action because HR Finance is designated by the county board as the committee to take action on claims that have been presented against the county. So sometimes we'll be asked to deny a claim, and that denial then triggers the ability of the claiming party to proceed further with a lawsuit if they choose. So those are just a few of the things, a high-level overview of what you might see from a statutory perspective of what we've been delegated at HR Finance.
And again, I because of other commitments, at a very high level, we have human resources. Molly is here, and, we set one of the critical issues we'll be dealing with is compensation, and we'll be talking about that at the next meeting, but grievances and other things will flow through this committee where there's a lot of that work was as a result of the state legislative changes relative to collective bargaining rights changed over the years. So our role is much more limited in those areas, but we have responsibility for short and long-term budgeting, both for the operational side and the capital side. So the capital improvement plan and the budgeting, we accept the administrative budget, have hearings on it, and then we'll make recommendations and modifications to that for the full county board. We will be looking at the committees under our jurisdiction: the Treasurer's Office, Finance Department, Corporation Council Clerks, Register of Deeds, Facilities and Capital Management, and Employee Resources. And anything with funding flows through us, so we really are that catch-all department. We have the claims. We look at the audit, and we look at the tax deeds, the policies and procedures of when we take title and other things. But again, this is very high level. discussion. We look at donations and grants, and one of the reasons we do that is there's a potential that donations and grants can encumber county dollars. And we want to make sure that in the acceptance of those donations and/or grants that we're not unintentionally getting more responsibility and potential liability associated with those. So there's a provision in again, reviewing those grant applications. Position allocations, new positions, we rely on the administrator to develop recommendations and bring those in. The transfer of funds, which we spent some time talking about today. Publication of notices and, again, disciplinary grievance and others. We monitor the organizational cultural survey results. We've used Denison in the past to do a workforce survey of how we're doing in terms of our core values and mission that will come in and they'll be done periodically. Look at benefits, employment policies. We've been charged in light of wanting to be the most prosperous county, want to make sure that we're inclusive and diverse in our recruiting practices, and we'll rely on HR to develop that, and additional duties as outlined or requested by the county board chair. That's a very high level. We'll get into a little bit more specifics. Lance?
And I know Chair Robinson referenced will have the departments come before you at a future meeting. If you want to, again, get a jump start on your homework, one of the pieces in the county budget that we added over the last 2 years, and we're going to continue to expound upon it, within the budget we have 2 pages for each of the departments, so you can look through those departments that do report to this committee in terms of policy oversight, and you can see kind of how they're organized. So each department will have an organizational chart, a little bit about the department, their main duties, and then highlights from the previous year, which was for the 2022 budget, the 2021 highlights, and looking forward to 2022. So if you want to look through that budget book, again, available online, all of the departments that are listed in that rule, subsection 4 for this committee, you can kind of start to get an idea, and you'll start to see that overlap that the chair referenced. Why is Molly here when we're talking about new positions? Well, because you ask new position requests to come through this committee through your rules. Christie, why is Christie here when we're talking about interdepartmental transfers? Mike told you, outlined by statute. So just a little bit of, if you're looking for that reading as to information, what are these departments working on, the budget is a great place to start.
I think there's always this agreement, but we're probably the hardest working committee in the county, just, with by virtue of it. I think ERC would say they may meet more or longer. They're just less efficient than we are. But we do have a lot of responsibility, and we'll be talking about the committee's work plan and what priorities you want at the next meeting, and then formalizing a plan going forward. Any questions that anyone would like to add? I look to the Yee, Allison, and Kurt, and see if you want to add anything relative to the committee.
None for me. Thank you, though.
All right. Anything else? If not, our next meeting, I think we've got a lot of items with Arpa and learning more about the departments under our purview and doing outcome monitoring for the foreseeable future. If you have items that you'd like to have included on our agenda, please contact either Supervisor Leahy and I talk about the agendas before they're finalized. Let us know, and we can include those items. I do rely on the vice chair for leadership and consult with her on a regular basis. Anything else? If not, our meeting is on the 24th at 3, and again, we'll be dealing with some of that education, but we'll also be dealing with the finalization of the resolutions and the appendixes to take to the county board that evening. If not, anything else? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order. Supervisor Leahy, seconded by Supervisor Marshall. Any discussion? All right, it's not debatable. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. We are adjourned.